When Jorge Mario Bergoglio stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica as Pope Francis on March 13, 2013, few could have predicted how his papacy would reflect and shape the dramatic global changes unfolding in the 21st century. As the first Jesuit pope, the first from the Americas, and the first from the Southern Hemisphere, his very election signaled a profound shift in the Catholic Church's trajectory. Beyond these historic firsts, Francis emerged as a unique spiritual leader whose priorities, style, and message mirrored broader transformations occurring worldwide. The times change, and we Christians must continually change. This statement from Pope Francis captures his recognition that the Church exists within an evolving global context that demands new approaches while maintaining essential truths. Throughout his papacy, Francis consistently demonstrated an uncanny alignment with emerging global priorities that were transforming societies worldwide. His emphasis on environmental stewardship, exemplified in his groundbreaking 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, anticipated the growing recognition of climate change as a defining crisis of our era. While environmental concerns had been mentioned by previous popes, Francis elevated ecological justice to a central moral imperative, integrating scientific consensus with spiritual reflection in unprecedented ways. This environmental focus represented just one aspect of Francis's broader realignment of Catholic priorities. His famous remark, "Who am I to judge?" regarding gay individuals, while not changing official doctrine, signaled a tonal shift that reflected evolving societal attitudes toward LGBTQ+ persons. His emphasis on mercy, inclusion, and pastoral sensitivity over rigid doctrinal application mirrored broader cultural movements toward greater acceptance of human diversity. Economic justice emerged as another defining theme of Francis's papacy, directly addressing growing global concern about inequality. His critiques of unfettered capitalism and trickle-down economics in Evangelii Gaudium reflected mounting worldwide recognition of how economic systems often marginalize vulnerable populations. When he described the economy as one that kills and questioned whether unlimited growth truly benefits humanity, he gave voice to concerns increasingly expressed across the political spectrum. Francis's leadership style itself reflected changing expectations of authority figures in the modern era. His preference for simplicity, choosing modest accommodations over the papal apartment, carrying his own luggage, wearing simple vestments, aligned with growing global skepticism toward institutional privilege and extravagance. His informal communication style, including spontaneous remarks and direct language rather than formal theological discourse, mirrored the authenticity increasingly valued in contemporary culture. The Pope's emphasis on decentralization and synodality, giving greater voice to local churches and ordinary Catholics, paralleled broader societal movements toward participatory governance and skepticism of top-down authority structures. His willingness to acknowledge institutional failures, particularly regarding clerical sexual abuse, reflected growing expectations for transparency and accountability from leadership across all sectors of society. Francis's outreach to other religions showed remarkable alignment with increasing global religious diversity and dialogue. His unprecedented friendship with Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayeb and the resulting document on human fraternity represented the kind of interfaith collaboration increasingly necessary in a pluralistic world. His trips to regions like Iraq demonstrated prioritization of peacemaking in a world confronting sectarian division. Perhaps most significantly, Francis's unwavering focus on refugees and migration anticipated one of the defining humanitarian challenges of the 21st century. His first trip outside Rome to the Mediterranean island of Lampedusa, a primary arrival point for migrants crossing from Africa, symbolically centered migrants in his papacy years before migration would emerge as a dominant political issue across Europe and North America. His willingness to challenge wealthy nations on their response to displaced persons, memorably washing the feet of refugees and bringing Syrian families to live in the Vatican, provided moral leadership on an issue that would increasingly define global politics. While his positions generated controversy, they reflected his consistent alignment with emerging global challenges rather than comfortable tradition. As we explore these connections more deeply, a compelling case emerges that Francis wasn't merely responding to his times. His papacy consistently anticipated and helped shape emerging priorities that would define the early 21st century. Whether viewed through religious or secular lenses, Francis represented a leadership model uniquely attuned to an era of rapid change, institutional skepticism, environmental urgency, and humanitarian challenges. The environmental leadership Pope Francis demonstrated throughout his papacy revealed his profound alignment with emerging global priorities. While previous popes had mentioned ecological concerns, Francis's 2015 encyclical Laudato Si represented an unprecedented papal focus on environmental issues that anticipated the central role climate action would play in subsequent global discussions. What made Francis's environmental approach particularly significant was how it integrated scientific consensus with spiritual reflection. Rather than seeing ecology as merely a political or technical issue, he framed environmental degradation as a moral and spiritual crisis requiring fundamental transformation in human attitudes toward creation. This holistic perspective aligned with growing recognition that environmental challenges cannot be addressed through technological solutions alone, but require deeper shifts in values and priorities. The encyclical's emphasis on integral ecology, connecting environmental health with human dignity, economic justice, and social harmony, anticipated the increasingly integrated understanding of sustainability that would emerge in subsequent years. Francis repeatedly emphasized that everything is connected, a perspective that mirrored the developing scientific consensus about ecological systems and social consequences. His environmental leadership extended beyond documents to practical initiatives. The Vatican became the world's first carbon-neutral country during his papacy. He established the Vatican Ecology Learning Garden and solar panel projects, demonstrating that religious institutions could model sustainable practices. These practical steps aligned with growing expectation that institutions should demonstrate environmental commitment through concrete actions rather than merely rhetorical support. Francis's approach to sexuality and gender issues similarly reflected changing societal attitudes while maintaining core Catholic teaching. His famous response when asked about gay priests, "Who am I to judge?" signaled a tonal shift that emphasized pastoral sensitivity without changing doctrinal positions. This approach mirrored broader societal movements toward inclusivity while acknowledging traditional religious perspectives, a tension increasingly prominent in contemporary cultural discussions. His 2016 apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, addressed family issues with unprecedented pastoral flexibility. By emphasizing discernment in addressing complex situations like divorce and remarriage, Francis reflected growing societal recognition that human relationships rarely fit neat moral categories. His emphasis on accompaniment rather than judgment aligned with evolving approaches to pastoral care that prioritize relational support over rigid rule application. Economic justice emerged as another defining theme that demonstrated Francis's alignment with contemporary concerns. His critiques of unfettered capitalism voiced growing global recognition of how economic systems often fail vulnerable populations. When he questioned whether unlimited growth truly benefits humanity and criticized trickle-down theories as naive, he articulated concerns increasingly expressed across the political spectrum about market fundamentalism. His specific focus on work, technology, and human dignity anticipated challenges that would become increasingly central in subsequent years. As technological disruption and automation transformed labor markets, Francis consistently emphasized that economic systems exist to serve human flourishing rather than the reverse. This people-centered economic vision aligned with mounting questions about whether existing economic structures adequately protect human dignity amid technological transformation. Francis's leadership style itself reflected changing expectations of authority figures in the modern era. His preference for simplicity, from his modest Ford Focus to his decision to live in the Vatican guest house rather than the papal apartment, aligned with growing skepticism toward institutional privilege and extravagance. At a time when many institutions faced criticism for disconnect from ordinary people, Francis's accessible style represented a leadership model attuned to contemporary values. His communication approach similarly mirrored changing expectations. Rather than formal theological pronouncements, Francis frequently employed direct conversational language accessible to ordinary people. His use of vivid metaphors, like telling priests to be shepherds living with the smell of the sheep, or warning against the church becoming a museum of memories, reflected contemporary emphasis on authentic, relatable communication over formal institutional language. The Pope's emphasis on decentralization and synodality within church governance paralleled broader societal movements toward more participatory structures. By establishing processes that gave greater voice to local churches and ordinary Catholics, Francis aligned with contemporary expectations that healthy institutions should incorporate diverse perspectives rather than imposing top-down directives. His willingness to acknowledge institutional failures, particularly regarding clerical sexual abuse, reflected growing cultural demands for transparency and accountability. While critics argued his responses sometimes fell short, his acknowledgement that abuse represented a systemic institutional failure rather than merely individual misconduct aligned with evolving understandings of institutional responsibility for addressing wrongdoing. Francis's outreach to other religions showed remarkable alignment with increasing global religious diversity. His unprecedented friendship with Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib and the resulting document on human fraternity represented the kind of interfaith collaboration increasingly necessary in pluralistic societies. By articulating that religious diversity exists within God's plan rather than representing competition, Francis offered a theological framework aligned with contemporary multi-faith realities. His diplomatic initiatives consistently emphasized dialogue and bridge building in a world often characterized by polarization. By establishing channels with leaders like Patriarch Kirill of the Russian Orthodox Church, resulting in the first meeting between Catholic and Russian Orthodox leaders since the Great Schism of 1054, and visiting places like Cuba and Myanmar, Francis demonstrated the mediating role religious leadership can play amid geopolitical tensions, a function increasingly valuable in a fragmented international landscape. Perhaps most significantly, Francis's unwavering focus on refugees and migration anticipated one of the defining humanitarian challenges of the 21st century. His first trip outside Rome to Lampedusa symbolically centered displaced persons years before migration would emerge as a dominant political issue across Europe and North America. By consistently challenging wealthy nations on their response to displaced persons, Francis offered moral leadership on an issue that would increasingly define global politics. These alignments between Francis's priorities and emerging global concerns weren't merely coincidental. They reflected his distinctive background as the first pope from Latin America, where liberation theology's emphasis on structural justice and preferential option for the poor had significantly influenced Catholic thought. His experiences serving marginalized communities in Argentina provided perspective distinctly different from his European predecessors, allowing him to anticipate issues that would increasingly define global conversations. As we continue exploring these connections, we'll examine how Francis's papacy not only reflected these emerging global priorities, but actively helped shape conversations about them, demonstrating religious leadership's potential role in addressing contemporary challenges when aligned with evolving societal concerns. Pope Francis's impact extended beyond merely reflecting contemporary concerns. He actively helped shape global conversations on key issues, demonstrating how religious leadership could influence public discourse when aligned with emerging priorities. This catalytic role revealed his papacy as not just a mirror of the times, but an active force helping define them. The impact of Francis's environmental leadership demonstrates this influence most clearly. When Laudato Si was published in 2015, it arrived at a crucial moment preceding the Paris Climate Agreement negotiations. By framing environmental protection as a moral imperative rather than merely a political or economic issue, Francis helped shift the conversation beyond technical solutions to deeper questions about human responsibility toward creation. The encyclical's influence extended well beyond Catholic circles. Scientific journals published analyses of its contributions, environmental organizations cited its frameworks, and political leaders across the ideological spectrum acknowledged its significance. Even those disagreeing with specific policy recommendations recognized that Francis had fundamentally altered the climate conversation by integrating scientific, ethical, and spiritual dimensions in unprecedented ways. What made this influence particularly significant was how it transcended traditional political alignments. By connecting environmental concerns with poverty, migration, and economic justice, Francis challenged both progressives and conservatives to reconsider positions. His integration of environmental and social justice concerns anticipated what would later be articulated in frameworks like the Green New Deal and sustainable development, approaches that recognize ecological and social concerns as inseparable. Francis's approach to economic questions similarly shaped emerging discussions about capitalism's future. When Evangelii Gaudium criticized trickle-down theories and an economy of exclusion, these statements generated global discussion far beyond religious circles. Business publications, economic forums, and political leaders engaged with his critique of market fundamentalism, helping catalyze broader reconsideration of economic assumptions that had dominated global policy for decades. His specific emphasis on human dignity amid technological disruption anticipated concerns that would become increasingly central to economic discussions. As artificial intelligence, automation, and digital transformation accelerated, Francis consistently emphasized that technological progress must serve human flourishing rather than merely economic efficiency. This people-centered vision influenced emerging conversations about technology ethics and responsible innovation. The migration focus that defined Francis's papacy similarly shaped global discourse. By consistently centering displaced persons in his messaging and travel, Francis helped elevate migration from a peripheral political issue to a central moral challenge of our era. His framing of migration responses as a test of moral character rather than merely political policy influenced how religious communities and humanitarian organizations approached the issue. His specific call for every parish, religious community, and sanctuary to welcome refugee families created concrete action beyond rhetoric. Catholic organizations worldwide expanded refugee resettlement programs, and his example motivated other religious communities to increase their migration response. The practical impact extended beyond Catholic circles to influence broader humanitarian approaches to displaced persons. Francis's leadership style itself represented a model that influenced expectations of institutional leaders across sectors. His emphasis on simplicity, accessibility, and proximity to ordinary people's concerns established a leadership paradigm increasingly valued in an era skeptical of institutional disconnection. His willingness to acknowledge mistakes and institutional failures modeled transparent leadership when many organizations struggled with accountability challenges. His communication approach similarly shaped evolving expectations of how authority figures should engage the public. Rather than formal, institutional pronouncements, Francis frequently employed direct language accessible to ordinary people. His use of social media, spontaneous phone calls to individuals, and willingness to engage unscripted questions represented communication authenticity increasingly valued in contemporary culture. Perhaps most significantly, Francis's emphasis on the peripheries anticipated the growing recognition of perspectives beyond traditional centers of power. By consistently centering voices from marginalized communities and the global South, Francis helped accelerate institutional recognition that authentic leadership must engage diverse perspectives. This approach aligned with broader societal movements toward recognizing historically excluded voices. The pastoral flexibility Francis demonstrated regarding complex moral situations reflected evolving approaches to ethical questions in pluralistic societies. While maintaining core Catholic teachings, his emphasis on accompanying people through complex circumstances, rather than merely pronouncing judgment, aligned with growing cultural emphasis on contextual rather than absolutist ethical frameworks, an approach increasingly influential in both religious and secular ethical discussions. Francis's interfaith initiatives similarly shaped evolving approaches to religious diversity. The 2019 document on human fraternity, signed with Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib, established new possibilities for substantive collaboration across faith traditions. By moving beyond mere tolerance to active partnership on shared concerns, Francis helped develop models for meaningful interfaith engagement increasingly necessary in diverse societies. His diplomatic engagement in conflict zones demonstrated the potential for religious leadership to facilitate dialogue when political channels fail. His interventions in situations like Venezuela, South Sudan, and Cuba showed religion's potential diplomatic role amid declining institutional trust in traditional political structures, a function increasingly valued in a fragmented international landscape. Francis's reform efforts within the Vatican itself modeled institutional transformation aligned with contemporary expectations. His creation of new accountability structures for financial management, enhanced roles for lay leadership, particularly women, and emphasis on administrative simplification reflected growing demands for institutional modernization. These internal reforms demonstrated his understanding that religious institutions must adapt to maintain relevance while preserving essential traditions. The synodal process Francis established, creating structured opportunities for diverse voices to shape church direction, developed a participatory governance model increasingly valued across institutional contexts. By institutionalizing mechanisms for listening, dialogue, and collaborative discernment, Francis created structures that reflected contemporary expectations for how authority should function in complex organizations. What made these influences particularly remarkable was how they transcended traditional religious-secular divides. Francis managed to engage audiences typically skeptical of religious leadership, environmental activists, technological innovators, progressive political movements, while simultaneously challenging aspects of these movements from religious principles. This distinctive ability to transcend standard ideological categorization allowed his message to influence discussions beyond typical religious boundaries. The global reaction to Francis from diverse quarters demonstrated this unusual cross-boundary influence. His reception from figures as diverse as Bernie Sanders and technology industry leaders, climate scientists and anti-poverty activists revealed unusual capacity to engage contemporary concerns in ways that resonated beyond Catholic or even religious audiences. This broad influence reflected his distinctive alignment with emerging global priorities while maintaining grounding in religious tradition. As we continue exploring these connections in our next section, we'll examine specific case studies demonstrating how Francis's approach to contemporary challenges represented new models for religious engagement with social issues, models that influenced expectations for how spiritual leadership might address complex problems in the 21st century. Specific case studies throughout Francis's papacy demonstrate how his approach to contemporary challenges created new models for religious engagement with social issues. These examples reveal how his leadership aligned with emerging global priorities while offering distinctive religious perspectives that influenced broader societal conversations. The 2015 visit to the United States represents a particularly illuminating case study. During this journey, Francis addressed the U.S. Congress, the first pope to do so, and delivered a speech to the United Nations General Assembly. What made these appearances remarkable was how Francis transcended traditional political categorization while addressing contemporary challenges. In his congressional address, Francis highlighted 4 American figures representing different dimensions of his vision: Abraham Lincoln, freedom and equality; Martin Luther King Jr., pluralism and non-exclusion; Dorothy Day, social justice and rights of the oppressed; and Thomas Merton, dialogue and openness. This framework allowed him to address contentious issues like immigration, environmental protection, and economic inequality through shared American values rather than partisan positioning. His ability to simultaneously challenge aspects of both progressive and conservative worldviews during this visit revealed a leadership approach that transcended standard ideological boundaries. While emphasizing issues like climate action and migrant protection typically associated with progressive priorities, Francis simultaneously defended traditional family structures and religious liberty concerns more typically associated with conservative perspectives. This distinctive approach, maintaining religious principles while engaging contemporary concerns in accessible language, created a model for religious contribution to public discourse that resonated beyond Catholic circles. Political analysts noted how Francis demonstrated religion's potential constructive role in addressing divisive issues through moral frameworks that transcended partisan alignment. The Vatican's 2020 COVID-19 response provides another revealing case study. Francis established the Vatican COVID-19 Commission to address the pandemic's interconnected medical, economic, and social dimensions. What distinguished this initiative was its integration of scientific expertise, economic analysis, and ethical reflection, demonstrating religion's potential complementary role alongside technical approaches to complex challenges. Francis's pandemic messaging consistently emphasized how the crisis revealed interconnected vulnerabilities requiring holistic responses. His frequent refrain that we should emerge from the pandemic better, not worse, articulated a vision that connected immediate health concerns with broader questions about economic systems, environmental sustainability, and social solidarity, precisely the integrated approach increasingly recognized as necessary for addressing complex global challenges. His emphasis that vaccines represented a moral obligation and should be equitably distributed worldwide helped counteract vaccine hesitancy in religious communities while advocating for global health equity. This approach demonstrated how religious leadership could simultaneously address spiritual concerns while promoting evidence-based public health measures, a crucial integration when addressing complex crises. The 2019 Amazon Synod offers another illuminating example of Francis's distinctive approach. This gathering addressed environmental, indigenous, and pastoral challenges in the Amazon region through a process that integrated scientific expertise, indigenous perspectives, and Catholic tradition. What made this initiative particularly significant was how it elevated marginalized voices typically excluded from both religious and policy discussions. By creating structured opportunities for indigenous leaders to address church leadership directly, Francis modeled institutional listening to perspectives from the peripheries, a practice increasingly valued across sectors but rarely implemented substantively. This approach demonstrated how religious institutions could incorporate diverse perspectives while maintaining their distinctive traditions, a balance increasingly sought in many organizational contexts. The economic vision articulated throughout Francis's papacy similarly provided a distinctive model for addressing contemporary challenges. His repeated emphasis on developing an economy that gives life, not death, went beyond criticizing existing structures to actively promoting alternative frameworks like cooperatives, social businesses, and circular economic models. His 2020 participation in the Economy of Francesco initiative, bringing young economists and entrepreneurs together to develop more inclusive economic approaches, demonstrated religion's potential catalytic role in economic innovation. By creating collaborative space connecting ethical principles with practical expertise, Francis showed how religious leadership could foster constructive alternatives rather than merely criticizing problematic systems. Francis's approaches to technological questions similarly established distinctive engagement models. Rather than adopting either uncritical embrace or wholesale rejection of technological progress, he consistently advocated ethical discernment, focused on whether specific technologies enhance or diminish human dignity. This nuanced approach offered frameworks for addressing emerging technological questions beyond simplistic acceptance or opposition. His 2020 call for ethical artificial intelligence through the Rome Call for AI Ethics represented this balanced approach. By bringing together technology companies, academic institutions, and religious perspectives, this initiative demonstrated how ethical reflection could complement technical expertise in addressing emerging challenges. This collaborative approach recognized both technology's positive potential and the necessity of ethical frameworks for its development. Francis's interfaith leadership provided particularly significant models for engaging religious diversity. The 2019 document on human fraternity, signed with Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayyib, moved beyond generic affirmations to address specific contemporary challenges through shared religious values. This substantive partnership demonstrated religion's potential unifying role amid societal fragmentation. a function increasingly valuable in diverse communities. His unprecedented 2021 visit to Iraq, including meetings with Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani and interfaith gatherings in historic Ur, established new possibilities for religious reconciliation in conflict zones. By physically journeying to regions marked by religious violence, Francis demonstrated religion's potential peacemaking function when leadership models the dialogue it advocates, an approach increasingly necessary in regions where religious identity contributes to conflict. Francis's migration leadership similarly established distinctive engagement models beyond conventional approaches. Rather than addressing migration primarily through policy proposals, he consistently emphasized humanizing encounters with displaced persons through symbolic actions like washing migrants' feet, bringing refugee families to the Vatican, and visiting detention centers. These actions demonstrated how moral witness, through direct engagement, could reshape perspectives on complex issues when policy discussions alone proved inadequate. By consistently centering the concrete human dimensions of migration rather than abstract debates, Francis offered a complementary approach to humanitarian challenges increasingly valued alongside technical solutions. What connects these diverse case studies is how they demonstrated religion's potential constructive role in addressing contemporary challenges when aligned with emerging priorities while maintaining distinctive spiritual perspectives. Francis consistently showed how religious leadership could engage complex issues through approaches that complemented technical expertise with ethical reflection, historical wisdom, and commitment to human dignity. This integrated approach, connecting spiritual insights with contemporary concerns, created engagement models that influenced expectations for how religious leadership might address complex problems in the 21st century. As we'll explore in our final section, these models offer insights about potential constructive relationships between religious traditions and contemporary challenges that extend beyond Francis's specific papacy. The insights from Pope Francis's papacy extend beyond Catholicism to broader questions about how religious leadership might constructively engage contemporary challenges. His distinctive alignment with emerging global priorities while maintaining grounding in religious tradition offers a model with implications for diverse faith communities navigating complex modern contexts. Perhaps Francis's most significant contribution was demonstrating how religious leadership could transcend the false dichotomy between traditionalism and relevance. Rather than choosing between preserving tradition and addressing contemporary concerns, Francis consistently showed how authentic religious engagement with modern challenges could emerge from tradition's depths rather than its abandonment. This approach suggests that religious traditions contain resources for addressing emerging issues when applied with both fidelity and creativity. The environmental leadership that characterized Francis's papacy illustrates this integration. Laudato Si didn't merely adopt secular environmental concerns, but reframed them through distinctive religious concepts like creation care, intergenerational ethics, and spiritual perspectives on consumption. This approach demonstrated how religious traditions might engage contemporary challenges, not by simply adopting secular frameworks, but by contributing distinctive insights from their wisdom traditions. Francis's emphasis on developing an integral ecology, connecting environmental health with human dignity, economic justice, and social harmony, revealed religious thought's potential synthetic function amid increasingly fragmented societal conversations. While political and technical discussions often separate environmental concerns from social questions, Francis's approach consistently emphasized their interconnection, demonstrating religion's potential role in providing integrated frameworks for addressing complex challenges. His approach to economic questions similarly illustrated religion's potential constructive contribution, beyond either uncritical embrace or wholesale rejection of contemporary systems. By articulating an economic vision centered on human dignity and creation care rather than profit maximization alone, Francis showed how religious perspectives might offer complementary values alongside technical economic expertise, precisely the integration, increasingly recognized as necessary for addressing systemic challenges. This integrated approach, connecting spiritual wisdom with contemporary concerns, suggests potential constructive relationships between religious traditions and modern challenges that avoid both rigid traditionalism and uncritical accommodation. Francis consistently demonstrated that meaningful religious engagement with contemporary issues emerges not from abandoning distinctive spiritual perspectives, but from applying them creatively to emerging questions. Francis's emphasis on dialogue across differences provides another significant model. In an era of increasing polarization, his consistent willingness to engage diverse perspectives, from liberation theologians to traditionalist Catholics, environmental scientists to business leaders, religious authorities of different traditions to secular humanists, demonstrated religion's potential bridge-building function within divided societies. His approach to dialogue emphasized encounter over mere theoretical exchange, prioritizing direct engagement with different experiences and perspectives. When addressing migration, Francis consistently centered actual migrants' voices rather than abstract policy frameworks. When discussing poverty, he prioritized direct engagement with impoverished communities. This experiential approach to dialogue demonstrated how religious leadership might foster understanding across differences through concrete encounters rather than merely theoretical discussions. Perhaps most significantly, Francis modeled religious leadership that prioritizes service rather than institutional self-preservation. In an era when many religious institutions face declining societal influence, his consistent focus on serving humanity's needs, rather than defending institutional prerogatives, demonstrated religion's potential constructive role when freed from self-referential concerns. His emphasis that the Church should function as a field hospital healing wounds, rather than a fortress protecting tradition, illustrated how religious institutions might regain relevance through practical service addressing contemporary needs. This service orientation, prioritizing human flourishing over institutional advantage, offers a leadership model applicable across religious traditions, navigating changing societal contexts. Francis's approach to institutional reform similarly provides insights beyond Catholicism. His consistent efforts to align institutional structures with core religious values while adapting to contemporary expectations demonstrated how religious institutions might navigate necessary changes while maintaining essential continuity. His reforms consistently aimed at greater transparency, accountability, and participatory processes, precisely the institutional qualities increasingly valued across organizational contexts. The synodal processes Francis established, creating structured opportunities for diverse voices to shape church direction, developed a participatory governance model potentially relevant for many religious institutions, balancing traditional authority with contemporary expectations for inclusion. By institutionalizing mechanisms for listening and collaborative discernment, Francis created structures that honor both hierarchical tradition and modern participatory values. His leadership style itself offers insights about effective religious engagement with contemporary society. Francis's emphasis on authenticity, accessibility, and proximity to ordinary people's concerns established a leadership paradigm increasingly valued in an era skeptical of institutional disconnection. His willingness to speak directly about complex issues in accessible language demonstrated communication approaches that connect religious perspectives with broader audiences. These insights extend beyond Francis's specific papacy to fundamental questions about religion's potential constructive role amid contemporary challenges. At a time when religious institutions often face declining societal influence or retreat into defensive postures, Francis demonstrated alternative approaches centered on constructive engagement from within religious traditions rather than either accommodation or isolation. The distinctive contribution religions might offer contemporary discussions emerges from this balanced approach, neither abandoning tradition for relevance nor sacrificing relevance for tradition. Francis consistently showed how religious traditions contain resources for addressing emerging concerns when approached with both fidelity and creativity. Precisely the integration increasingly necessary for meaningful religious engagement with complex, modern contexts. For believers across traditions navigating relationships between faith and contemporary challenges, Francis's example suggests several principles. First, authentic religious engagement with modern issues emerges from tradition's depths rather than its abandonment, finding resources within religious wisdom for addressing emerging concerns. Second, meaningful dialogue requires direct encounter with different experiences rather than merely theoretical exchange. Third, religious institutions serve their missions most effectively when prioritizing service over self-preservation. For those outside religious traditions, considering religion's potential societal contributions, Francis's papacy suggests alternative frameworks beyond viewing religion as either irrelevant tradition or merely another ideological position. His approach demonstrated religion's potential complementary role alongside technical expertise, offering moral frameworks, integrated perspectives, and service commitments that address dimensions of complex challenges sometimes overlooked in purely technical approaches. Regardless of one's religious perspective, Francis's distinctive alignment with emerging global priorities while maintaining grounding in religious tradition offers insights about potential constructive relationships between religious wisdom and contemporary challenges. His papacy demonstrated that meaningful religious engagement with modern questions requires neither wholesale adoption of secular frameworks nor retreat from contemporary concerns, but creative fidelity that finds resources within tradition for addressing emerging issues. As global societies continue navigating complex challenges requiring both technical expertise and moral frameworks, Francis's model of religious leadership suggests potential constructive partnerships across sectors when religious traditions engage contemporary questions, through approaches that honor both tradition's wisdom and emerging realities. This balanced engagement, maintaining distinctive spiritual perspectives while addressing shared human concerns, represents perhaps his most significant contribution as a sign of the times. Like, share, subscribe, and comment with your thoughts on how religious leadership might constructively engage contemporary challenges. How do you see the relationship between traditional wisdom and emerging priorities in addressing complex global issues? The most powerful leadership emerges not from abandoning tradition for relevance, nor sacrificing relevance for tradition, but from finding within tradition's depths the very resources needed to address our most pressing contemporary challenges. David Brooks.